Part 93. It's not that difficult to open a hospital in another world, right? Author, Geoland 2020. Chapter 924. Archmage Edgar arrived in a hurry. There was a rare layer of sweat on that sallow, skeleton-like face. The dark black robe was wrinkled, as if it had just been fished out of the pickle vat. Behind the Archmage, slowly and staggeringly, a middle-aged warrior came down. His dark chestnut hair was slightly mixed with silver threads, and his half-worn leather armor was slightly bulged by his belly. It was obvious that he had been living a leisurely life during this period. The middle-aged samurai carries two swords at his waist and carries a leather bag on his back, which is bulging with something. As soon as he got off, he leaned against the carriage. Looking at his lazy movements, he seemed to be able to lie down anytime and anywhere. Sweat. Gretel was speechless for a moment. He silently raised his eyes and looked at Archmage Edgar. That's it? Just this one? Is this the guide you want to introduce to me? Archmage Edgar was helpless for a moment. However, this guide was truly the most suitable person he could find and hire in the short term. He could only bite the bullet and introduce Gretel. This is Valenchimo, a level 12 warrior who has traveled in the New World for a long time. Bard Mr. Samurai interrupted. He didn't say hello or introduce himself, he just lazily raised his eyelids and slashed Greet's body. With that look in his eyes, Greet could almost automatically guess. Is this the little guy you want me to take care of? Fortunately, Mr. Samurai didn't say anything. However, in order to prove his profession, he reached into the leather bag behind his back, pulled out an instrument that looked a bit like a guitar, and a bit like a ukulele, and played a little tune casually. While playing, he sang softly, tilting his head slightly, looking very pleased with himself. If Greet saw it correctly, half of the lipstick mark remained on the inside of the collar of his leather armor, and the other half fell on his neck. If Archmage Edgar dragged him out from a place like this, then Gretel could understand why this gentleman was reluctant. After singing, Valenchimo swept his 5 fingers on the strings, rolling out a string of cheerful notes. Gretel's brows suddenly moved. A warm breath enveloped me, and its effect was roughly equivalent to half of the encouragement technique, that is, half of a shot of adrenaline. This samurai who calls himself a bard has some real substance. However, the bards in this world do not seem to be as powerful as mages and warriors. As a marginal profession that can use the power of limited elements, if the bard in front of me is just a bard, it seems that he is really not as strong as level 12. He glanced at old Morgan, who had a solemn expression and nodded slightly. His lips moved, and a voice floated to Gretel's ears. I have heard of his name. He is a level 12 warrior who has indeed been in the New World for a long time and has rich experience. Moreover, his reputation is quite good. Gretel breathed a sigh of relief. He glanced at Archmage Edgar again. Archmage Edgar smiled bitterly, took out a piece of metal, and handed it to Gretel. He has traveled in the New World for nearly 20 years. He has gone deep into the New World many times and is very familiar with the customs of the New World. Master Nordmark, if you want to go to the New World, asking him to be your guide will greatly increase your safety. Greet looked down at the piece of metal in his hand. It was semicircular, less than half the size of a palm, and its edges were twisted and broken. It was obviously a fragment. Looking at the pattern on the front, it might be a clan emblem or something like that. Although I don't know what it represents, but judging from Edgar's attitude, it should represent some kind of promise. Can you ask this guide to take action or complete something? I don't know what price Archmage Edgar paid to get this thing. After all, Archmage Edgar is currently level 13. It is not that easy to recruit a level 12 warrior who requires a specific range of experience. Greet nodded heavily to him. Then, he handed the black cat in his arms to Cyrilla, held the metal piece in his arms, and walked slowly towards the warrior named Valenchimo. Hello, Mr. Balancimo, I am Gretel Nordmark, a level 9 mage. My friend Lin is in danger in the New World, and I want to go there as soon as possible to rescue him. Without waiting for the other party to answer, Gretel waved his hand gently, and a silence spell fell silently. Seeing that the other party just opened his mouth without making a sound, and simply shut up after a few syllables, Gretel cancelled the silence spell and looked solemn. However, it is impossible for me to entrust the lives of myself and my friends to an unwilling guide. Mr. Balancimo, if you don't want to go, please retrieve this token, and I will treat it as done. Made a promise. The middle-aged warrior's eyes changed slightly. Then, he waved his hand very simply, and his tone was still lazy, but also decisive. Okay, you don't have to say such things. Since I owe a favor. He pointed to the metal piece in Greet's hand. I will fulfill my promise. How to take you out, how to bring you back, as long as you are obedient, don't seek death, and don't run around. I, Valenchimo, will walk from the east coast to the west coast of the New World, even to the far north. I will follow you as far as the south. Hello. Cyrilla was unhappy. What are these words? I can't save Greet as long as I'm here. I still need you to point your fingers to make Gretel obey and not seek death. Gretel couldn't help but laugh. This guy has a bad tone, but for newcomers to strange places, especially to the wilderness, these reminders are really important. I remember that when we were aiding Africa before, the order given by the team leader was almost like this. Be obedient, don't seek death, follow the team and don't run around, don't touch everything you see. That thing that looks like a bumpkin to you might be a nest of man-eating ants. He smiled back at Cyrilla and winked. After comforting Miss Silver Dragon, he turned to Valenchimo, stretched out his hand solemnly, and pointed to the mage tower. Don't worry, I will respect the wisdom and experience of professionals. So, can you please take a look at the preparations we have made for the journey and point out what needs to be added? After all, time is very tight. If we find a suitable ship, maybe two, we're leaving in 3 days. Valenchimo hummed, followed Greet and walked in quickly. Soon, his hissing sound could be heard in the mage tower. 500 pounds of flour, 500 pounds of dried meat, 500 pounds of milk powder, 200 pounds of butter seasoning cubes, glucose, what is this? 100 pounds, 200 pounds of sugar cubes. How many space bags have you brought? I only have a 150-pound one myself. No matter how much stuff you carry, you can only carry it in a backpack. Even if you are a magician, if you can have a magician who can carry 1,500 pounds inland, he is considered very rich. 500 pounds of freeze-dried vegetable bags, 10 pounds of bad blood, acid, sodium, 3 spare sets of leather armor, 3 spare sets of mage robes, clothing, underwear, socks, shoes. You guys are really not moving? These supplies are enough for 5 years. A set of alchemy equipment, 2 sets of spare alchemy equipment, a penicillin production line, a streptomycin production line, 5,000 penicillin, 5,000 streptomycin, 5,000 cowpox. Mr. Valenchimo silently closed his eyes, opened them, closed them again, and opened them again. Although he accepted that his new employer might be a super rich man, he still couldn't bear it and wanted to complain. Do you want to take the mage tower to the New World? Sorry, the mage tower cannot float for the time being. Gretel spread his hands innocently. Hey, when will he be able to make the mage tower levitate? I don't know if there is a substitute for the legendary Miser energy core in the previous life. Please subscribe, ask for monthly tickets, ask for recommendation votes, ask for book reviews, ask for all kinds of. Ada UN comes out to claim the character you set. It's not that difficult to open a hospital in another world, right? Author, Geoland 2020. Chapter 925. With the guidance of Mr. Guide, Greet was ready to set off and immediately pressed the fast-forward button. Valensimo probably had never had such a wealthy boss in his life. He came to his senses and immediately opened an order. These shoes are no good. They are not breathable, not wear-resistant, and not waterproof. The indigenous deerskin boots are much easier to use, especially when walking in the wilderness. Leather boots are probably not available anymore, so buy some deerskins first. I will do it. Next to Gretel, an oak staff rolled up an endless ink pen and he jotted down, 100 deerskins. The corners of Valensimo's eyes immediately jumped. Do you think I am a shoemaker? 100 deerskins, when will I get them? No, this boss is just a wealthy man who wants to be fully prepared for everything. He stared at Gretel warily. I only make 2 spare pairs. If I want to prepare more, I can buy them when I get to the New World. Or I can spend money to let the natives make them. Don't worry, I will take action when the need arises. Gretel smiled. I am also a magician. Simple manufacturing tasks are not difficult for me. Valensimo snorted and continued to read the list. The mage is amazing. If you want something, you can just rub it, unlike them who have to do it with your own hands. Well, the mage is really amazing. By the way, we also need to reserve herbs. Although your healing skills are very strong, sometimes herbs are more useful. Buy a batch here first, and a batch of New World specialties. You have to buy them over there. Prepare an extra batch of water bladders and buckets. There is a large desert inside the New World. Once there, even the water-making technique won't be able to create much water. Tent and sleeping bags, prepare a few extra replacements. There are always some places that are too narrow, making it inconvenient to open a mage cabin. Flying carpets or other flying props, if convenient, you can buy a few more. It will be more convenient when climbing mountains. By the way, buy another batch of materials for building traps. Here is the detailed list. Beside Gretel, the roots of the oak staff stopped for an instant. The 9 leaves on the wooden stick swayed, and Greet raised his head together. Can you do it? Certainly. Money makes things easier. Gretel stopped performing outpatient surgery for a day, and the apprentices in the hospital and the mage tower, as well as the barbarian security guards, were running around. The sun had not set the next afternoon, and he bought everything the guide asked for. Aurora even took the mage badge and accompanied the guide to the alchemy guild, equipped with a spare set of leather armor, a pair of swords, a dagger, a bow and an arrow, and a shield. By the way, he was equipped with a 1,000-pound space bag. These alone are enough to hire me for a trip. Valensimo sighed many times, one long and one short. Then, he jumped up energetically. After you get the money, you have to work. Let's find a boat. Find the safest and most stable speedboat. Make sure Mr. Master is safe and sound, arrive as soon as possible, and be able to read a book on the way. No time is wasted. Valensimo does have a lot of experience. He didn't go looking for anyone. He just went to the tavern near the pier, ordered a few drinks, and talked a few words with the proprietress. Aurora watched helplessly as several tavern boys ran out. It didn't take long for people to arrive one after another. Valensimo received 7 or 8 people, looked at 3 boats, and immediately decided on one. Moonstone, a new ship 2 years ago, has made 4 trips to the New World. The one-way trip only takes 1.5 months, which is half a month faster than other ships that come here to pick up passengers. The cabin is spacious, not luxuriously furnished, but clean enough. The floor height is high enough that a barbarian can stand up straight inside without touching the top of his head. He has experience in receiving magicians, and has dedicated errands who know the rules and will not annoy anyone. The cargo hold can carry large animals, and when the sails are furled, the silver moon deer can take a few steps on it. The most important thing is that you can set off in 3 days. Greet was very satisfied. He doesn't have to do all this himself. It's great to have someone to worry about. As for money, what is money? In addition to not being able to build Cyrilla's bed of gold coins, would I, Gretel, the inventor of dynamite, the inventor of penicillin, the corresponding author of the invention of cowpox and streptomycin, Nordmark, be short of money? It took him a day to receive the two constant spells Blark words and psychic connection. After another day, Cyrilla and I accepted the gifts from the archmages and checked various equipment. On the last day, I listened to the teacher's teachings, brought back a bunch of magic books, scrolls, and notes, and left a lot of notes for Carlos and Anavia. Set off. The voyage was not that smooth, and it was not like Aurora once shouted, "I will faint from seasickness halfway through." Sometimes, under a clear sky, the Moonstone opens its white sails and glides as lightly as a bird on the sea. Sometimes, when the weather suddenly changed and there was a violent storm, the crew risked their lives and rushed out to furl the sails and tie up the sail ropes. Gretel secretly threw out the activation rope and saved a few unlucky guys who fell into the sea. Sometimes, the waves stood up, and the whole ship was thrown up to the crest of the wave and pushed down to the trough. Greet sat in the cabin and watched Mr. Trochka spread his short legs and run as fast as he could on the floor. Little by little he slid towards the door, then crashed into his arms. In short, after a month and a half of twists and turns, the group finally arrived in the new world. Within this month and a half, Greet made 3 sets of leather robes and boots for each of herself, Sarah and Bernard. I have learned 4-5 ring magics, and although I have not yet studied them myself, I am already able to cast them skillfully. With a wonderful rejuvenation, he treated the illnesses and injuries of more than a dozen crew members and passengers. He even learned 2 traps from Valensimo. It's a pity that the workmanship is so rough that the guide commented that anyone with eyes will definitely not step in it. And, continue to ask Mr. Trochka where they happened. Worst of all, Mr. Trochka's ability to read maps is truly beyond words. Facing the map Greet spread out, he basically had no idea where to start. Moonstone furled its sails and, under the leadership of the pilot boat, slowly approached the shore. Greet flew high to the top of the mast, overlooking the sparkling port and the numerous sails, and took a deep breath. Whether Brother Lin and can return smoothly depends on this wave. He flew from the top of the mast to the trestle. As soon as he set foot on the new world, Mr. Trochka raised his head and let out a long meow. The kitten, which had been sleeping miserably for more than a month and only woke up occasionally to eat, became energetic for the first time. It spread out its 4 paws, rushed into the grass, and rolled several times. "I'm much better. Greet, let's go quickly." It seems that after arriving in the new world, Mr. Trochka got closer to the part of his existence that was torn away and recovered a little. Gretel secretly speculated and turned to ask the guide, "How do we go?" Valensimo was already carrying a rucksack and carrying 2 swords at his waist, and walked quickly over to wait for him. Hearing this, he replied without hesitation, "Of course, follow the caravan. If there is an indigenous caravan, that would be best. I'm going to get some news. You can disperse first and walk around dash." He took out a map from nowhere, spread it out in front of everyone, and pointed at a red dot in it. "During lunch, meet at the Mayflower Tavern in the center of the town." "It's the Mayflower Tavern, remember." "Gretel. Who came up with this stupid name?" He carried the cat directly to the Mage Tower. After walking around the Port Mage Tower and the other 2 Mage Towers in the city, I didn't receive any letters from Lin, not a single letter within half a year. Lin's previous letters were all sent to the Port Mage Tower by someone, and then sent to Nevis from the Mage Tower. Not for half a year, that is, from the time Mr. Trochka ran out to report the letter to now, he has not sent a letter? No news is good news. Gretel comforted himself silently, holding Mr. Trochka in his arms, and arrived at the edge of Waltham town, next to the tallest oak tree. Stepping into the circle of stone piles, pressing his hands on the bark of the tree, he silently asked. Have you ever seen someone like Brother Lin? Seen it? Several springs ago. So, what about this black cat I'm holding? Seen it? Several full moons ago. At that time, it was not like it is now, more powerful and more unstable, as if it was about to dissipate. The oak tree conveyed an image to him. Mr. Trochka ran as fast as he could, trailing a faint trail of black smoke, without looking back. The figure was hazy, and things like debris kept falling in the oak tree's field of vision. Gretel stared deeply through the oak tree's eyes, and could only see that it was running from the depths of the new world, and there were no pursuers around it. As for how far he ran and where he ran from, the side of the oak tree couldn't reach that far. Can you help me ask the surrounding vegetation where it came from? The oak tree was silent for a long time. The breeze blew, the grass and trees swayed, and the natural power in Greet's body flowed into the oak tree like a gate opening. Gretel couldn't help but smile bitterly. This oak tree really fully fulfilled the principle of equal exchange and gave him no preferential treatment at all. But okay, just ask for him. Maybe it was dozens of breaths, maybe it was hundreds of breaths, and Greet's consciousness lit up bit by bit. Big trees, shrubs, wild grasses, and reeds, in his consciousness, outlined a vast map that extended into the wilderness. Then, a black line drew straight across the wasteland, across the stream, over the hills, and deep into the forest. The map in my consciousness doesn't have a scale, but from where the big oak tree is to the edge of the map that gradually blurs and disappears, it's probably about 100 miles. It's good. With Mr. Trochka leading the way, you can ask about the nature around you from time to time, so you don't have to worry about finding the wrong place. Greet smiled and sent another wave of natural power to the big oak tree as a thank you gift. He carried the black cat back to the center of the town and inquired all the way until he came to the Mayflower Tavern that made him want to complain. When he opened the door and saw Mr. Valenchimo, Greet paused and wanted to turn around and run away. Please subscribe, ask for monthly tickets, ask for recommendation votes, ask for book reviews, ask for all kinds of. Thanks to @Shadow of the Earth Knight for the 5,000 starting coins reward. You are listening to Novels at Bless Up channel. Wish you happiness and luck. Please subscribe to receive new novels. How do you feel about this novel? Please like and leave a comment. It's not that difficult to open a hospital in another world, right? Author, Geolan 2020. Chapter 926. Hug, sorry. Gretel pushed the door open, immediately stopped, apologized, and closed the door. He took a few steps back and looked up at the sign in front of the store. Mayflower Tavern. That's right, it's really the center of town, the Mayflower Tavern. Let's just say that he doesn't have any road-crazy attributes. Besides, it's impossible for him to remember such a distinctive store name. Gray regained his composure, added a bubble spell to himself, and opened the door again. Thick white, slightly bluish smoke hit our face immediately. The scene was roughly equivalent to a day-long operation in the operating room, where the electrosurgery was used to stop the bleeding, and the smoke aspirator was broken. Greet could only be grateful that he had practiced the bubble technique to perfection. One puff of such thick second-hand smoke will shorten your life. But in the middle of the second-hand smoke, Mr. Valenchimo sat with his legs crossed, very comfortable. There is a cigarette in his mouth, which is obviously a second-hand smoke machine. Gretel understood him. It is better to suck something first than suck something second. The thing that looked a bit like a guitar and a lyute was held in his arms, rocking his body while playing it enthusiastically. A group of men and women gathered around him, dancing an extremely joyful dance. When Greet pushed the door open last time, there was a waitress leaning back, leaning on Mr. Valenchimo's kicked legs forward, bending herself into an arch. She saw him coming in and winked at him. Double glance. Greet, who had been mentally prepared, finally walked into the tavern smoothly. Seeing him come in, Valensimo did not stop playing, but raised his voice during the interval of music. "Boss, please find a place to sit first. The baguettes and shell soup in this tavern are good. The mutton is also very good. If you go in, you can't find the fragrant black-nosed sheep without the smell of mutton." Gretel nodded to him, carefully found a place to sit by the window with fresh air, and ordered half a pound of bread, a portion of vegetables and a portion of mutton. As for the shells, no, he didn't want to see food in the water just yet, not even for a month. Soon, Bernard and Cyrilla came to join them one after another. Each of them ordered a lot of food and ate it. As for Valentino, even after the performance, there was a huge crowd and an endless flow. He sat in the warmest place by the fire, with a smile on his face and kept talking to people. Greet noticed that even if he didn't order food, a waitress would come over from time to bring food and drinks. And the people who came to talk to him were all kinds of people. A dancing girl with a plump figure wearing a brightly colored long dress. The tavern waitress walking quickly among the crowd holding a large wooden tray. A man in black with a hood on his head, reluctant to put it down even after entering the room. Carrying a large rucksack, the first thing he does when sitting down is to turn the rucksack to the front and hug him tightly. A young man with brisk steps, quick eyes, and a smile on his face anytime and anywhere. An indigenous warrior carrying a huge axe. "This communication skill is really terrible." Gretel shook his head and whispered. "Ah, he has to talk to so many people in one day, it's not that he can't handle it. When he's in the emergency room, he has to see more patients in a day, but if it's just to inquire about news. Ah, it's scary to think about it. With this time, he would rather find a quiet corner and read surgery or emergency and disaster medicine again." Gretel, who is essentially a social phobic, and whose social phobia has been aggravated by his medical career, shrank back and was very lucky to have brought a guide out this time. Someone has done the work of dealing with people. When Bernard finally filled his stomach, rubbed his belly with satisfaction and sighed, Greet didn't know whether Seriro was full, and didn't dare to ask. Mr. Valensimo finally ended the communication and said politely. "After a glass of wine, I got up and came over to report on my work. Boss, I've asked about it. In the past 6 months, nothing particularly unusual has happened in the depths of the New World, I mean, from here all the way to the mountains 300 miles away. Further in, there is no news yet. According to what you said, boss, to find Master Lin En, you have to go over the mountains and go inland. There is a caravan leaving the town recently, and there are 2 tribes of natives who have finished their business and are returning separately." He poured some wine on the table and sketched a simple topographic map. "The 3 teams are going in these 3 directions. Boss, which one should we follow?" Gretel thought for a moment and wiped it on the table. A much more detailed topographical map than that of Valentino appeared on the table, colorful and outlining mountains and rivers high and low. Pointing again, a black line extends straight inward from the port town. "Can we walk by ourselves?" "Follow Mr. Trochka's path and walk there by ourselves." Valensimo stared at the map on the table with envy and hatred. Silent apparition, a level 1 spell, and as a bard, he can do it. But you need to play and sing, you need to gesture, you need to fully mobilize your mental power. And it can only summon a few fixed phantoms. Such as roses, colorful birds, and rabbits. If he wanted to make a human form, he could do it. He tried his best and practiced for several years before he succeeded. It could only be used to defend himself and save his life in times of crisis. Unlike this person, with just a touch of his hand, he can get whatever he wants, and all the roads, mountains, and rivers can be seen in detail. Mage. Valensimo swallowed a sigh, calmed down, and looked at the map carefully. There are still some mistakes in the map projected by Greet. At the very least, some places are flat land instead of mountains and forests, some places are cliffs, and some places are not rivers but swamps. Obviously, according to the types of plants, Greet regarded all the trees as hills, the shrubs as flat land, and the middle of the reeds as rivers. As for how the news came, I couldn't think about it. The more I thought about it, the more jealous I became. Boss, if you go straight there is a swamp here and you have to take a long detour. Swamp? I remember the Phantom Pony can run directly there. I'll ask Appa if he can run there. Well, he said he can run there too, so that's okay. There is a mountain at this location. It's not a big deal to climb up. The cliff is very troublesome. It's okay, just fly down. What about the mount? The Phantom Pony can be cancelled, Appa can be made smaller, and we can fly with him in his arms. There will be high-level monsters in the forest. If they are alerted, it will be very troublesome to travel. How high is it? Level 10, Cyrilla suddenly leaned over, her silver blue eyes sparkling and full of interest. Still level 15? I haven't replenished my inventory of Warcraft meat for a long time. On how willful a high-level mage is. But the world is big, and the boss who pays the most money is the boss. Valensimo reminded himself secretly and began to seriously evaluate the feasibility of walking straight through the wilderness. Although the mage Nordmark is a level 9 mage, it is best to upgrade them from level 1 to level 2. As for this Miss Sarara, well, it's different from the team he led before. In the teams he led before, he himself was the strongest, and he often had to lead a group of 5th and 6th level guys. It's really impossible not to find a caravan to hang out and to find indigenous escorts. If something happens, high-level people can survive, but low-level people will die immediately. But this small team is level 16, level 9, and that big deer is level 8. Even his 5 important elite teams can run straight past them as long as they don't meet level 17 or 18 bosses. In this case, we will modify the plan. Boss Valentino changed his words calmly. Purchase enough food and spare supplies and leave directly from the wilderness. Give me a day, I should say, half a day and one night. Early tomorrow morning, at dawn, we will set off directly. Greet directly threw out a bag of gold coins. Throughout the afternoon and evening, Valensimo ran around the town and purchased a lot of messy things. As for the bulk commodities, Greet took the order issued by the guide directly and went to the Port Mage Tower. The presiding mage is very willing to help a level 9 mage, level 6 Arcanist, a young and powerful man with a bright future, solve some minor problems. The next morning, when the sun was rising, 4 people and 1 deer said goodbye to the big oak tree outside the town and walked straight into the wilderness. Gretel, Sarara, and Valensimo each had a phantom pony, their 4 hooves as light as smoke stepped on the ground. In the snowy wilderness, not even a single flake of snow could be splashed. As for Bernard riding Appa, the silver moon deer that grew up in the wilderness has a much better adaptability to the snowfield than humans. Yes, this is the direction, Mr. Trochka lay in Gretel's arms, a head peeking out from the gap in the fur cloak, staring ahead with bright eyes. I remember this part of the road. When I escaped back, I ran straight into the town from this direction. Gretel lowered his head and smoothed the black cat's fur, raised his eyes forward, and looked far and wide. According to Lynn's description, he had walked thousands and thousands of miles before, climbing over mountains, crossing rivers, and climbing onto plateaus. Although I walked and saw all the way, I often stopped to rest, study, or live in a certain tribe for a month or 2. At least half a year was spent on the road. If he and his group rush straight over, take a straight line and speed up, they may be able to arrive in 2 or 3 months, but can Lynn survive until they arrive? The sun that had just risen illuminated Greet and his party, as well as a large-scale megalithic building on the distant western plateau. At this moment, in the underground part of the huge stone building, there was a woman with a golden body, surrounded by maids, walking leisurely in the corridor. Down, down, until she reached the 5th underground level and entered the heavily guarded dungeon. She stopped the maids from following her. He pressed lightly on the wall, and the stone wall rippled like water, welcoming the woman as she entered. Master Lin En. With a smile on her face, the woman gently came over and sat down next to Lin En. Have you thought about it? Only I can save you. As long as you promise me, you don't have to be a sacrifice. Please subscribe, ask for monthly tickets, ask for recommendation votes, ask for book reviews, ask for all kinds of. Thank you for the 800 starting coins for the cauliflower-loving kid. It's not that difficult to open a hospital in another world, right? Author, Lan 2020. Chapter 927. Lin paused while stroking his fingers on the robe. The golden-haired woman cuddled up next to him, her face turned slightly, and she rested her head on his shoulder softly. The soft and greasy aroma spread silently, and just by smelling it a little bit, you can feel your heart swaying and your body heating up. But Lin, under the strong smell of spices and grease, could accurately identify the cold smell of the dead. Nilda, I've thought about it, I don't need your protection. He suppressed his beating heart, straightened his left hand with the silver chain, and pushed the woman away. I am a necromancer, not an undead. I am grateful for your kindness, but instead of being with you forever, I would rather lie on the altar and have my throat cut open by the stone knives of you. Why? Nilda's expression changed drastically. That face, covered with gold powder and runes, looked mysterious and beautiful under the firelight, and for a moment, it glowed with a faint green color, with a hint of deep black. The long, silky hair hanging down her back was raised high, and the ends of her hair even began to swell, making a thin snake hissing sound. The priestess trembled all over and subconsciously raised her hand, then lowered it at the last moment before touching Lin. Why reject me? I love you so much that I am even willing to enter the kingdom of our Lord with you and share the happiness of eternal life with you. It's not like you can't accept the dead. Isn't there that golden skeleton beside you? That's a partner, not a lover. Lin's weak defense was lost in the angry questioning of the priestess. Who wants to marry their own skeleton? Nilda slammed the door angrily and left. Lin En was left to sit silently in the stone prison, sighing sadly. He shouldn't think that he is level 9 and strong enough. He heard that there are strange undead spirits here and wanted to come and see them. It's fine now, the undead has seen it, and he can't run away. Sure enough, a large part of mages are driven to death by their own curiosity. The mottos of our predecessors should be kept in mind. I'm sorry, it seems you can only accept your fate with me. Lin stroked the space bag and whispered to himself. With the care of the priestess, his space bag was not even searched, it was just sealed tightly and nothing could be taken out. Since then, the golden skeleton has been sleeping until now. Fortunately, Mr. Trochka has been let go. I hope it runs far enough to a safe place and never looks back. Be a healthy and powerful monster and live happily. Lin slowly lowered his head. Soon, he raised his hand again, and his fingertips continued to trace on the robe. At the previous festival, there were still 35 runes he saw on the edge of the coffin that had not been analyzed. Although his ability to cast spells has been blocked, his thinking ability and calculation ability are still there. It's a pity. It would be nice if I could touch that transparent skull once. Gretel didn't know that when Lin was in prison, he encountered such a strange love affair. At this moment, he and his team members were setting up camp in the wilderness and preparing to spend the night. Cyrilla opened the mage's cabin with familiarity and took out a bunch of pots and pans from the space bag. Bernard spontaneously went to collect firewood and prepared to cook. Apa was stomping on the ice with his hooves at the edge of the creek, trying to make a hole to get water. As for Greet, after looking around, he found a big tree with the thickest trunk and the longest age, and leaned against the tree with the black cat in his arms. He turned his head sideways and closed his eyes slightly, obviously lost in meditation. Valensimo looked left and right. His teammates appear to be experienced when it comes to field trips. The camp was chosen to be in a sheltered place on the edge of the hills. The terrain was slightly higher, the land was flat and solid, and the distance from the stream bank was suitable, and it did not block the passage of drinking water for wild animals. Although the dragged firewood was covered with a thin layer of snow, after shaking it off, the wood underneath was still dry. The hardwood is laid out in a triangle below, covered with pine firewood, and then covered with a layer of dead branches. A circle of warning magic was placed around it, and the elemental power pulled up thin silk threads. Each thread was decorated with translucent bells, which would definitely ring if touched. It seems that even without him, these people can live well? What else do you want me to do? If you lead the way, others will walk in a straight line. If you negotiate, you won't meet anyone in the wild. If you set up camp, others will figure it out on their own. No. Be sure to show your worth. Once you get the equipment and get your salary, you must show your worth to be worthy of the remuneration, and you cannot be a salary thief. He looked around carefully. There were no suspicious footprints in the snow. There are no unusual breaks, fresh hair, or dung beside the bushes. There are no scratch marks on the trunk of the big tree, nor are there any marks made by sharp claws. Overall, this is a pretty safe campsite. You won't have to sleep until midnight and be woken up by something suddenly. Valentino returned to camp satisfied but not so satisfied. Then, when he saw the center of the camp for the first time, he couldn't help it. What are you doing? Stew in a pot. No, such good meat. You need to stew such good meat. Bernard had already finished putting a layer of meat and was putting tubers into the big and deep pot. He raised his head when he heard this. Don't worry, the stew I make is the best. But it would be a pity to stew such good meat in one pot. Baronissimo argued almost instinctively. He immediately came back to his senses and looked at Cyrilla. Ma'am, can you make an extra serving? I brought some lunch boxes, and the space bag can hold. Cyrilla nodded without thinking. Valensimo happily took out a pan, a round pot, a large stone slab, and a black spatula from the space bag. Then, he took out a bunch of condiments and laid them out in a row. These are oysters from Waltham seaside. I heard from the locals that last year's oysters grew very well and were very fat. If you add some salt to these oysters and roast them on the grill, the juice will burst out. This is venison brought and sold by the natives. The meat is a bit hard, so it's best to add some seasoning. Ah, the fresh berries just picked this autumn are so good. He deftly sliced the venison into thin slices, mixed several berries together, and squeezed them with his mage's hand. The juice dripped down and flowed on the venison. This sweet and sour pan-fried pork chop is my specialty. I am most familiar with the taste of each berry in every place and how to match it. This is a pheasant that grew up eating fruits in the woods. Now is the fattest time. We need to clean its belly, fill it with corn, chestnuts, and mushrooms, wrap it up and bury it next to the fire. He moved his hands dexterously, and within a short time, 3 or 4 pots had been set up on the fire beside him. Bernard, Cyrilla, and Appa, who had returned from drinking water, squatted in a row eagerly, sniffing the aroma gradually coming from the pot. Seeing that Cyrilla couldn't help but want to catch it, the sound of footsteps on the snow suddenly sounded in the woods, and the young man's happy shouting. Hey, friend, can you share a little with us? Please subscribe, ask for monthly tickets, ask for recommendation votes, ask for book reviews, ask for all kinds of. It's not that difficult to open a hospital in another world, right? Author, Giolan 2020. Chapter 928. Valentino immediately raised his head. This 12th level samurai seems to be cooking and introducing dishes all the time. but while he was carving the venison, cleaning the pheasant, turning the steaks, listening to the crackling of pans and stone slabs, he also kept his ears open to the sounds around the camp. According to his memory, there were no tribes or fixed trade routes nearby. It's already winter, and people are still running in the fields in the snow. Either they are really in trouble like this group of people, or... In short, it is always right to remain vigilant in the wild, no matter what. Being vigilant, he did not speak directly, but quickly looked around the camp. The silver moon deer scratched its hooves, raised its head slightly, and continued to stare at the steak on the fire. Bernard silently tightened his grip on the big bone club. Cyrilla's fingertips flashed fluorescent light, and 2 points of light floated out silently, falling on the barbarian and silver moon deer. Greet, who was sitting far away under the big tree, seemed to have finally ended his meditation and stood up holding the black cat. Valensimo looked at it carefully and found that the boss' eyebrows were stretched and his steps were calm. When he looked across, he didn't seem to have any surprise. He lowered his head and continued cooking, sighing in his heart. Natural pasture. Being in the wilderness and in the forest is such an advantage. Before those people spoke, or even before he heard someone coming, he must have been reminded, right? Greet had indeed known it for a long time. Not only did he know, he also knew that there was only one person on the other side. He is not very old. The big tree he is leaning on tells him that he is still a cub. Then, Greet looked at the aboriginal man walking out of the snow in the woods, and was in a rare daze. The man was tall. Gretel was probably half a head taller than himself. Of course, he was still shorter than Bernard. However, his body is not strong, his shoulders are broad, his back is not thick, and his upper lip is covered with a thin layer of down. Exposed outside the leather robe. The upper arms are bulging, but the wrists are still a bit slender. The smile is bright and sunny, the cheeks are round, and there is a little baby fat. Greet immediately wanted to go back and shake the tree behind him. Is this a cub? That's it? That's it? The indigenous cub, to be precise, a man who had just passed the boyhood stage and reached the youth stage and had not had time to become strong, smiled and waved his left hand at them. He raised his right hand slightly, showing the half-sized wild deer that had been dragged over by him and had expired. The pattern on the fur, if Gretel remembers correctly, is a guaranteed level 5 monster. The food you make tastes so delicious. Can we eat it together? Gretel looked at him intently. This indigenous young man looks only 16, no, 15, maybe 14 years old. He wasn't very good at judging the age of the New World natives. Maybe he could make a more accurate judgment by taking an X-ray and looking at the epiphyseal lines. However, when he walked over, he didn't deliberately cover up his steps. The bow and arrow on his back, the axe, and the long knife on his waist were not deliberately adjusted when he got close, and moved to the most convenient position for shooting. Coupled with the gesture of stretching out both arms widely and extending the palms forward, no matter how you look at it, it is full of kindness. This person is not as strong as me, Boss Bernard reported quietly in the spiritual connection. Greet glanced at Valensimo again, and when he saw him nodding slightly, he spread his arms towards the visitor, with his palms facing forward. Of course, please come with me, sir. My name is Gretel, and these are my companions. Sir, may I ask dash? Ah, my name is Raton, I come from Patuxent, and I'm here to conduct my adult trial, the visitor answered cheerfully, pointing to the bow, arrows, sword, and axe on his body. You are only allowed to bring these 3 things, and you have to live alone in the wilderness for a whole winter. Although you don't have to worry about hunger, and you can build a house by yourself so that you won't get cold, but eating game every day is too boring. Those are the Sons of Dawn, the largest tribe on the mountain. Boss, treat them with care, Valensimo warned in a low voice through the psychic connection. Raton took another deep breath. Spread your arms and let your chest swell as high as possible, as if you want to inhale all the aroma of oil smoke into your lungs. Pepper. Cinnamon. Purple spice. Sage. Your cooking is so fragrant. Sorry, I just can't bear it anymore. Can I have a meal? I can give you half a deer. Gretel smiled. He gently pointed forward, and a bulge appeared on the ground next to the bonfire. It was neither high nor low, just enough for people to sit comfortably in front of the bonfire. Raton threw the wild deer away, took out a birch bark bowl from his backpack, grabbed a handful of snow and rubbed it. Ah, I haven't eaten anything with spices for a long time. I originally wanted to catch some game and go to the nearby tribes to exchange for some, but they are all gone. There is none left. Greet's face immediately became serious. He cut a piece of steak, moved it to Raton's birch bark bowl with his mage's hand, and leaned forward. We have just arrived in the New World and are about to cross the mountains and head to the west. My friend, can you tell me later what happened in the New World in the past 2 years? Of course, Raton used a croissant dagger as a fork, forked the steak, and ate until his mouth was full of oil. But I used to live in the mountains, so I don't know much about things around here. Anyway, I'll try my best to tell you. Accompanied by the toasted white bread, the hot stewed meat and tubers, the sweet and sour venison steak, and the soft and delicious pheasant buried in the soil beside the fire, Gretel heard a long story. And he finally knew what happened on this continent when the year without summer came. In order to feed as many citizens as possible, Congress moved approximately 200,000 people to settlements in the New World. And these 200,000 people need to store enough food if they want to survive the year without summer and the spring famine the year after the year without summer. The method adopted by the council was to send knights, mages, and all warriors into the wilderness to hunt as many prey as possible. Then, mobilize the people in the settlement to use all methods to store these foods. I have never seen such a cold summer. Last summer, there was a snowstorm overnight, and all the rivers and streams froze. Speaking of the summerless year that just passed, Leighton shivered subconsciously. Our roundhouse was covered with chestnut bark in summer. There was no time to replace the roof, and it was crushed right away. During that time, many people in the tribe fell ill. Gretel's face was heavy. Lawton rubbed his arms and his face became even darker. Nothing can grow in the fields. We who live in the mountains are okay, some prey will not move away, but the tribes in the east, the bison and wild deer were either killed last year, or they went south, has not come back for a long time. The Great Famine. Greet said softly. Now it seems that the parliament took care of its own people, but did not care about the life and death of the indigenous people. Or, hunting animals on a large scale in advance will make it extremely difficult for these natives to rely on hunting to fill their stomachs when famine strikes. Only the new arrivals have food, only they have food, Raton muttered gloomily. Some tribes tried to rob their towns and were killed or sold into slavery. Some tribes signed contracts with them and got enough food, as long as they worked for them. They all moved in the past. I was told to work. Please subscribe, ask for monthly tickets, ask for recommendation votes, ask for book reviews, ask for all kinds of. I wanted to complain about the last chapter. Who said Brother Lin and took the script of Brother Yudi? That's a necromancer flower. You are listening to Novels at Bless Up channel. Wish you happiness and luck. Please subscribe to receive new novels. How do you feel about this novel? Please like and leave a comment. It's not that difficult to open a hospital in another world, right? Author, Geoland 2020. Chapter 929. Greet lowered his head silently, holding back a sigh and an outburst of curses. This is already good, he thought, already good. They just took advantage of the information gap to take advantage of the situation and force the natives to join the immigrants and sell their labor in order to have enough to eat and survive. There was even a way for the natives to survive. As long as you are willing to accept employment, you will have food to eat and you can survive. There was no massacre, no looting, and no deliberate or unintentional release of various infectious disease sources. There was no reward order, 100 gold coins for the scalp of every man over 12 years old, 50 gold coins for the scalp of every woman or child, no boots made of indigenous leather to show off. But greed is still very sad. It would be great if the parliament had stronger strength, higher productivity, and more humane care. In that case, it could do better. We can use softer methods, higher civilization, and richer lives to slowly attract, assimilate, and accept these natives into one body. Instead of leaving too much death and hatred in the process. He forked a piece of steak with force and stuffed it into his mouth, instantly choking and rolling his eyes. Sarala looked sideways at him, waved her arm, and patted him hard on the back. Cough. 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 Gretel curled up and coughed until tears came out. This regiment was in disarray and struggled for a long time. When Gretel finally calmed down, Sarala waved her hand and removed the barrier between them and the bonfire. Bernard lifted the lid of the saucepan again and Valensimo put the pan back on the fire. Appa snorted, lowered his head, and continued to eat his portion of barbecue quietly. Gretel raised his head, wiped the tears from the corners of his eyes, and smiled at Raton. Sorry, I choked all of a sudden. You're welcome, keep eating, let's talk while eating, wait. He quickly stood up on his knees and pointed at a big fish that had just been removed from the stone slab and was sizzling oil. Leighton immediately put back the antler fork in his hand, and saw a faint brilliance emitting from Greet's hand. Okay, it's time to eat. Gretel raised his head and smiled at the guest. A breeze passed by and cut the grilled fish into 7 or 8 even pieces. Then, the mage's hand transformed and took a piece of fish tail for himself. That way there's no sting. Raton forked a piece of it doubtfully. Sure enough, the small spines inside the fish meat have almost become soft and elastic, and can be cut off with your teeth if you bite into it. He chewed hard for a few times, and his mouth was full of oil. This is good. This is good. The young native's whole face lit up. The whole person leaned forward and then leaned back, trying hard not to spit his saliva on the stone slab. How is this done? With this method, the children of our tribe are no longer afraid of fish bones getting stuck in their throats. You don't know, every year in spring, when the mountains and rivers come down, half of our food is fish. Well, this is the method of the spellcaster. Can I learn it? Leighton moved twice impatiently. However, everyone was eating around the fire, with Appa on his left and Valensimo on his right, and they couldn't move to greet. The indigenous boy had no choice but to half prop himself up, took off the necklace around his neck, and patted Greet in front of him. A string of animal teeth, bones, beaks, claws, turquoise, cat's eye, amber and various other gems sparkled in the firelight. I can pay you. I am a student of the Great Witch Festival, and I know how to cast spells. If these are not enough, I can also be your guide. Anyway, I will be outside this winter. I will accompany you as you climb the mountains. It will be much more convenient. Gretel hesitated. In the spiritual connection, Valensimo's communication has been transmitted. Boss, these beast teeth and bones are likely to contain beast souls. Gems are also useful to spellcasters. There are always spellcasters willing to pay big prices for them. Moreover, having the son of Dawn accompany you over the mountain will reduce the cost a lot. Danger. Greet nodded slightly. It's not that he is unwilling to teach his magic, especially this spell, which can reduce the risk of fish bones getting stuck to many children. The problem is that. Well, let me explain briefly first. First of all, to activate this spell, you need to use your mental power to cover the entire fish and accurately find every fish bone. Leighton's beautiful black eyes immediately froze. He stared at the fish pieces in front of him, looking hard, as if staring like this could touch the tiny fish bones with his mental power. After a while, he wailed. I can't find it at all. I can only feel the big bone in it. But that big bone doesn't need to be removed in the first place. There is nothing we can do if the mental power cannot cover it so delicately. After Gretel advanced to level 9, he slowly practiced playing whack-a-mole with the electric ball given by the teacher, until he could cover every little thorn. The warrior level of this indigenous boy named Raton is definitely less than level 9, probably only level 7 or 8. The caster level, based on the mental power Greet feels, is maybe only level 2 or 3. Greet smiled and pushed the necklace back, indicating that if she couldn't learn it, forget it, and the tuition would not be charged. But Layton immediately sat back down and even leaned back as far as he could. It doesn't matter if you can't do it. I can practice slowly in the future. What's next? What's the next step? The next step is to extract the calcium from the bones. Gretel opened his mouth, not knowing what to say. How should I tell him to extract an active metal element called Ca from the fish bones, with an atomic number of 20, an atomic weight of 40.078, a valency of Ad2, and a silvery white color in the elemental state, from its compound? This guy is a native. He is not even as good as the magician of the council. The council, or at least the magicians of Nevis, after all these years of hard work, they still have some idea of elemental elements. For the sake of the children of the tribe, Gretel had to rack his brains to find a way to make people understand. He said slowly. Next, we have to pull out the hard things from the fish bones. Hard. Hard. Greet nodded vigorously. Layton frowned and muttered to himself repeatedly. Hard, hard, hard. He stretched out his hand and grasped falsely, and grasped falsely again. Gretel concentrated on sensing that there did seem to be vague magic fluctuations in the air. It was very obscure and completely different from the variant of the antidote he used. The problem is, the fish bones don't seem to change shape under his spell. He seems to want to extract the concept of hardness in the spiritual connection, Cyrilla commented quietly. This is not easy. With his level, he can't do it, right? Forget it, eat first. Layton resolutely gave up trying. Nothing can make me give up a big meal. Let's talk about studying and stuff tomorrow. After finishing his meal, he wiped his mouth and left quickly. That night, far away from the camp, there were whistles, beatings, neighing, and running sounds that rang intermittently all night long. Early the next morning, as soon as Greet and everyone got up, they saw Raton riding a big deer and appearing in front of them with a smile on his face. Dear Mr. Spellcaster, please let me follow you and learn this spell from you. I will send you over the mountain. Please subscribe, ask for monthly tickets, ask for recommendation votes, ask for book reviews, ask for all kinds of. It's not that difficult to open a hospital in another world, right? Author, Geoland 2020. Chapter 930. It's best to take a detour ahead. Ahead is the territory of a very ferocious old bear. It will take about half a day to the left to reach the river. Layton lay on the deer's back, tightening his deerskin robe as much as possible to block the cold wind, and yelled. Greet turned back on the back of the phantom colt, smiled and waved her hand to him. It's okay, let's pass by. That old bear is hibernating, let's speed up and we won't run into it. The indigenous boy muttered something, and saw the phantom colt and silver moon deer galloping in front of him, never to return, so he could only urge his reindeer to keep up. He rushed into the forest with sparse branches and covered with snow. When he was about to run out of the forest, a faint roar of a bear sounded behind him. After roaring for a few times, it gradually subsided, probably because it found that the target was too far away and could no longer catch up, so it went back to sleep as if nothing had happened. Raton breathed a sigh of relief. He carefully identified the terrain that had been changed due to the cold winter and heavy snow, and soon shouted again. "That area ahead is a swamp. Be careful." The phantom pony ran over as smoothly as possible. The caster turned back on the horse and flicked his fingers slightly. Leighton immediately felt a breeze surrounding himself and his deer. Then, when the deer's hooves stepped on the snow, they only felt a slight sinking feeling. Gretel even had time to let the phantom colt turn a corner, pull out a panicked roe deer from the swamp, and give it a bath with the cleaning technique. Mage. Raton lay on the reindeer's back unconvinced. He was also a student of the Great Witch Festival, but the skills that the Great Witch Festival taught him were to inspire his companions, intimidate opponents, stop bleeding, treat and detoxify bit by bit, and make limited use of beast souls. Being so relaxed and happy, you can do whatever you want, and you can achieve your goal with just a few clicks of your fingers. It's so enviable. The indigenous warrior who came out to perform the coming-of-age ceremony squeezed the handle of the knife in his hand and planned to keep up his efforts. The other party doesn't want the beast's soul, nor does he want the gems on the necklace. The beautiful girl with pointed ears has a gem on her forehead that costs him hundreds of. However, he will definitely find a way to give enough reward in exchange for the skills he wants to learn. Fortunately, starting from the next morning, he entered the mountain climbing journey he was most familiar with. Raton let go of the reindeer and walked briskly ahead, jumping up and down. If you want to climb mountains, this is the right place to go. I'm familiar with the mountains around here. If you go through this valley, there will be water sources and campsites along the way, and there will be the fewest mountains to climb. Greet hugged Mr. Trochka and nodded to him. The phantom pony climbed up with light steps. The black cat subconsciously chose the most convenient path and did not deviate too much from the route guided by Raton. The bushes around Greet kept whispering. "It's been here. Yes, I remember the smell. Vomit, it smells a bit. I came when the weather was warmer, and I still had a lot of leaves at that time." Greet felt that by maintaining this high-intensity natural communication and running from the east to the west of the New World, his priest level could be raised by 1 level. They spent the whole day trekking across mountains and rivers, and by the time dusk fell, they had climbed over 4 or 5 mountain ridges. Leighton took them down the mountain very diligently. "There is a cave here." It turned out to be a bear cave. After he was killed, the cave belonged to us. This location is very good, not deep nor shallow. The cave has a bend and the cold wind from outside can't come in, shh. He suddenly stopped, raised his left hand, and made a stop gesture. In the darkness, the indigenous young man nimbly dodged to the side and lay down behind a big rock. Someone. Click, click. The sound of treading on the snow sounded regularly, and a group of natives filed out of the bear cave and groped upwards. Everyone was carrying a bow and arrow, a spear, or an axe, and they walked carefully and tried not to make any noise. Gretel could see under dark vision that each of them was boiling with fiery aura. In addition to the heat, there is also a hint of coldness. In the spiritual connection, Valenchimo nervously reminded. "Boss, they have bad intentions." "It's okay, it's not against us." Gretel responded with a heartfelt voice. In his perception, the attention of this group of people was all directed upwards, or in other words, toward high places far, far away. As long as they are not discovered, they should be fine. He flicked his fingers slightly, subtle fluctuations passed by, and a series of soundproofing and invisibility spells fell around the group of people. 5 people, 1 deer, and a black cat stood quietly, waiting for the group of natives to disappear beyond their awareness. Then, turning to the indigenous teenager. "Where did this group of people come from? Will it be detrimental to your tribe?" "No, boss." As the day passed, Leighton became very skillful in calling Gretel after Bernard and others. "They are from the Black Kite tribe and have enmity with the Blue Sheep tribe above. Our tribe is in the other direction. The son of Dawn turned around and faced the opposite direction where the Black Kite tribe left. He stretched out his arm as much as he could and pointed. It's far away. Besides, our tribe is very strong and they don't dare to mess with us. That's good. We don't cause trouble, and we're not afraid of trouble. Greet nodded quietly. This campsite can no longer be used. Could you please take us a little further? They climbed over another hill, unfolded the mage's hut in the open space in the lee, and slept peacefully. After sleeping until the moon was high in the sky, Greet's warning placed at the edge of the camp was suddenly touched by someone. Ding 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 ding. Ding 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 ding. A series of crisp bells sounded on the illusory magic thread. Valensimo and Leighton also jumped up quickly from their respective blankets. Click, 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 the snow around the campsite was being stepped on. Greet rubbed his eyes and directly released a piece of illumination. Raton stood up and shouted. Who? All dead. All dead. When night fell, the group of natives who sneaked towards the mountain appeared in a panic under the lighting spell. The paint on his face is half red and half black, with various tattoos tangled underneath, making it look weird and a bit scary. However, everyone's lips were pale and trembling. Gretel quickly threw an induction spell over, and then another charm human. When Leighton asked again, he saw the pupils of these people widening subconsciously. They are all dead, all dead. Who died? The Blue Sheep tribe. We plan to attack them sneakily and open up their shacks. There is not a single living person, they are all dead, piles of dead. Leighton. Back off. Gretel raised his voice. A group of natives shouted, turned and fled as if they had been granted amnesty. The snow and dust billowed, and soon they were out of sight. Gretel was left standing in the snow, looking at the direction they came from, with a sinking face. All dead? What happened? Could it be that the plague is coming again? Please subscribe, ask for monthly tickets, ask for recommendation votes, ask for book reviews, ask for all kinds of. It's not that difficult to open a hospital in another world, right? Author, Geoland 2020. Chapter 931. Greet looked at the distant mountains with a serious face, and his mind was full of thoughts. Glancing out of the corner of his eye, he saw that Leighton had already run out a few steps and wanted to stop him to ask a question, but he immediately stopped. Leighton. Stop. Close your eyes. Hold your breath. He mobilized a little power of command technique while shouting, and the indigenous boy immediately froze in place with a command and a movement. Immediately afterwards, the cleaning technique was gently brushed over the whole body, and with a splash, a big water ball was poured directly on the head. Before Mr. Raton had time to shiver, another round of cleaning magic swept through him, sweeping up the disinfectant on his head, body, and feet, and sprayed it directly into the forest glade. Near the indigenous boy, Bernard stood still and turned around, showing a nostalgic smile. Not long after arriving in Nevis, when setting up the first laboratory, Greet was like this, leading him to splash disinfectant around every day. After pouring the disinfectant, Greet stood up straight and continued to look up at the dark mountain peaks. If he was in Nevis and heard that an entire village was dead, he would definitely go and have a look to nip the plague in the bud. But now, he felt uneasy if he didn't take a look. If he did, it would probably be a bottomless pit, and he didn't know how much energy and time it would take. Lin An is still waiting for him to save her. With light steps behind her, Cyrilla walked to him through the snow, and quietly looked up to the top of the mountain with him. After looking at it for a moment, he whispered. Let's go and see it early tomorrow morning. We only see one tribe, no matter what the situation is, and then leave. If we work harder, we can still gain back the time even if we run 12 hours a day. Gretel nodded heavily. He returned to the mage's hut and fell asleep. There is no way, spellcasters have this limitation. In order to have spells available the next day, They must ensure enough sleep time. When the first ray of sunlight illuminated the top of the mountain, Greet and Sarah both took off. Behind Gretel, a pair of golden red dragon wings flapped powerfully, providing him with enough lift that he could even lift the indigenous boy. Raton was floating in the air, one arm was pulled by Gretel, and the other arm was waving in the air, shouting. "It's right here. It's this direction. Lower. Lower. They should be living in a cave at this time. The location of the cave is lower, not on the top of the mountain. Turn to the side." Under the guidance of the natives, Gretel quickly passed through the woods and landed at the entrance of the cave. Just 2 steps after landing, Gretel's face turned serious. The leather curtain covering the entrance of the cave has been opened by the forerunners. The smell of death, filth, and putridity gushed out almost as if it were erupting from the cave. The moss on the cave wall, the flies and beetles crawling around, everything told him. There is a lot of death here. There are many. A lot of. Without thinking, Gretel quickly added defensive spells for himself, Cyrilla and Raton. Alas, now that he is too delicate, he is no longer willing to wear full-body protective clothing. As long as it can be solved with magic, then use magic to solve it. Bubble technique. Apply another layer of whirlwind. Hey, it's a pity that the firewall technique has not been practiced to the level of senior brother. It sticks to the body in a thin layer and does not affect anything such as vision and hearing. With that thing there, all filth can be burned away, and you won't be afraid of any infectious diseases. What bacteria or virus could successfully infect him even after being burned by hundreds of degrees of heat? After doing this, Gretel pointed forward, and the secret eyeball floated in. The light curtain unfolded, and Cyrilla and the indigenous boy gasped at the same time. Corpse. It was all corpses. The layers are stacked on top of each other, the wife is next to the husband, the mother is holding the child, horizontally, vertically, diagonally, and they bend down and fall down halfway. So many people died. From the rear right, Leighton was so shocked that his voice trembled. There are 200 to 300 people in the Blue Sheep tribe. How many people have died? Can't they all be dead? The arcane eyeball continued to fly. The camera went deep into the cave, and more corpses began to appear on the light screen, in every small fire pit, in every area separated by stones and used as a small family territory. There was more than one corpse lying down. The faces and skin of those who had been dead for several days had begun to rot and deform, and it was impossible to tell what the cause of death was. But people who have recently died can see dense blisters on their faces and hands, festering and leaking pus, making their entire faces somewhat deformed. Smallpox. Greet looked serious and softly uttered a word. Thank God it was smallpox. People who came from the Kingdom of Kent had all been vaccinated with cowpox before boarding the ship. Even those from earlier years, I have the impression that there was someone dedicated to vaccinate them. That means that these natives are not infected by people from the Kingdom of Kent, and immigrants from the kingdom will not be affected. Cyrilla nodded heavily beside him. Only Raton stared at the light screen until the light ball reached the bottom of the cave, then he squatted down in frustration. Dead, really all dead, even the Great Witch Festival is dead. This tribe has been completely destroyed. Gretel was relieved instead. If they are all dead, there will be no possibility of transmission. Unless someone runs around during the disease, it should not be transmitted to other places. He stretched out his hand forward and threw an oil spell into the cave. After a pause, another one came. It wasn't until the effect was the same as the grease spell, except that the created liquid was highly flammable, that it covered the entire cave. Then he flicked his fingertips and a wall of fire flew out. Boom! The golden red flames rose high and were sealed outside by the firewall technique. Greed turned around and grabbed Raton, stomping his feet hard, and dragon wings appeared behind him again. Walk! They quickly flew back to their campsite and continued to climb mountains and ridges under the guidance of nature. Riding horses and flying, they stood on the last mountain ridge that evening, looking far into the great plain shrouded in the setting sun. The clock of good fortune is beautiful, the yin and yang separate the dusk. Gretel looked far into the distance, looking at the endless plains beneath his feet, and couldn't help but sigh softly. The mountain ridges behind were completely shrouded in shadow, while the plains spread out to the horizon at their feet, and the whole thing was coated with a gentle golden light by the setting sun. With such a vast plain and such a rich water system, how many fields can be cultivated and how many people can be fed? If open to farming, this place can become the granary of the world. But if smallpox had continued to spread, it might have been destroyed. Or, if it spread from the south, from the area occupied by the glorious Holy See, then the indigenous people on this land would have faced tragic deaths long ago. They activated their flying skills and were supported by the airflow on the hillside, gliding all the way down. With both feet on the ground, Gretel had just found a big tree and began to communicate with nature and confirm the direction. From a distance, a group of indigenous warriors rushed over. "Don't go ahead," their faces were smeared with colorful paint, and they had feather crowns on their heads, waving battle axes made of steel and obsidian. "Strangers who bring death. Go back. Go back. Don't enter our territory." The quarter-end sprint begins again. The goal of this sprint is to save 1,000 starting monthly tickets from today to the end of the month. As long as you save enough, 2 more chapters will be added. Please subscribe, ask for monthly tickets, ask for recommendation votes, ask for book reviews, ask for all kinds of. Thanks to @bookfriend2022531090349686 for the reward of 500 starting coins. You are listening to Novels at Bless Up channel. Wish you happiness and luck. Please subscribe to receive new novels. How do you feel about this novel? Please like and leave a comment. It's not that difficult to open a hospital in another world, right? Author, Geoland 2020. Chapter 932. Before Gretel had time to react, Raton had already rushed in front of him. He opened his arms, faced the indigenous warriors, and raised his voice. "Hey, we don't mean any harm." He put his palm forward and shook it vigorously twice to show the other party that he was harmless. The soldiers on the opposite side sneered. "Baby. Go aside. Immature little baby. Don't talk." "How do those people know he is underage?" Cyrilla asked quietly. Greet stood on tiptoes and looked forward, without turning her head to the side. "Maybe it's because there are no tattoos or colors on his face." Raton said he is still undergoing adult trials, maybe he has to pass the trials and become an adult warrior before he can do this. During the 1.5-month voyage, he also brought a lot of information about the New World, and occasionally read to change his mind while studying spells. Although he can't quite distinguish between this tribe and that tribe, he still knows a little bit about the general situation. When the two people were whispering to each other, there was already a quarrel in front of them. Leighton waved his hands and tried to raise his voice. "The person behind me is the distinguished Grand Wizard. Even though he is from outside, he is also the Grand Wizard. Look at me, do I look like I can fly? He was the one who took me down from above." He turned around and pointed at the top of the mountain, then pointed aggressively at the group of colorful adult warriors in front. "You guys who only know brute force must show enough respect when facing the Great Witch Festival." Well, Gretel painfully suspected that his constant knowledge of language might have some translation problems. Or do these New World natives refer to all people with spellcasting abilities as shamans or great shamans? But one's own people cannot tear down one's own people. Greet pointed to the side, and a burst of fire shot out, rushing 10 meters away before gradually dissipating, leaving behind hot and twisted air. Then he waved his hand again, and a bright white ball of light swayed down. When it fell on Leighton, some cracks and frostbite on the young man's earlobes and fingers took an immediate effect and disappeared. "I am a healer," he raised his voice, "we have just arrived here. We are not the ones who brought the plague, and we have no malicious intentions. As long as you allow us to pass, we will not enter your residence, and we will not even interact with anyone. Contact will only leave quickly." Several indigenous warriors looked at each other, and their eyes burst out with blazing light. Gretel suspected that their eyes had built-in light-gathering and reflective effects, which could amplify the brightness of the healing light ball 10 times and then reflect it out. The leading soldier, whose hair on one side was cut short enough to expose his ears and whose hair on the other side was braided, pondered for a moment and said in a low voice, "You wait." After whispering a few instructions, an almost bald soldier beside him nodded and ran away, obviously going back to report the news. Seeing this, Greet took 2 steps back, leaned under the big tree he had chosen before, and began to meditate. "Hurry up and ask the big tree for directions." Mr. Trochka was so groggy when he escaped that he could not remember anything except some particularly obvious landmarks. Big trees are more reliable. I asked many big trees along the way and they all said they could remember their smell. "Come on, tell me, what's around here, how should we go next, huh?" The spiritual power continues to extend forward along with the big trees and shrubs. Pushing away, constantly greeting the surrounding vegetation, suddenly, in the perception, a very strange thing suddenly appeared. A highlight. A very obvious highlight in the wilderness. Not as bright as Sarala, teachers, or senior brothers and sisters, but down to earth and honest. Standing there steadily, it seems that it will not be shaken for hundreds of years. Around the bright spot, there are some light spots like fireflies, shining brightly. Some were bright, some were dark, and some seemed to be so dark that they were about to go out, and the brightest spot suddenly expanded, and then swayed as if it was about to go out. Then, another light spot left the group, getting closer and closer to me, getting closer, getting closer. "Dear Great Witch Festival!" A shout interrupted Greet's meditation. Gretel suddenly opened his eyes. The bald warrior who had run away before was panting and shouting, running towards him from afar. Behind him, 2 other warriors followed, running wildly in exactly the same way, with the paint on their faces unable to hide their red faces. "Dear Great Witch Festival," the bald warrior ran 5 steps in front of Gretel, braked suddenly, and bent down deeply. "We, Hasaba Witch Festival, please come to our tribe. We have many people sick. Many, many people. Hasaba Witch Festival has no other options. He told us that we must seek help from the respected Great Witch Festival." Gretel. Sure enough, healing techniques are popular everywhere. He just nodded, and the 2 soldiers behind him had already rushed forward, saluted, turned, and unfolded a thing in front of him. The bald warrior and the braided warrior who gave orders before raised their hands at the same time. Greet looked at it and saw that it looked like a sedan. Well, probably, a piece of black leather was tightly stretched between 2 wooden poles. From a big perspective, it's a sedan, from a small perspective, it's probably a slide pole or a stretcher. So, are they going to ask him to come up and be carried to the station? In short, Greet would not sit on this thing, even if he died. He twitched the corner of his mouth, released the phantom cold for himself and Valensimo, and got on the horse. "Lead the way." The phantom pony spread its hooves and ran towards the sunset, arriving at the settlement of this tribe in a short time. In the dusk, Gretel saw a middle-aged man from a distance, wearing a feather crown and a brightly colored leather robe decorated with various feathers and beads. He hurriedly came over. "Guests from afar. Please save the Redstone tribe. The ferocious devil is raging in the tribe, and I really have no choice. This is their tribe's Grand Witch Festival." Gretel seemed to have returned to the northern wilderness and saw the elders of the barbarian tribe. "Oh, Maybe it should be called shaman? He quickly put on an anti-epidemic suit for himself, stretched out his hand from a distance, and made a stop gesture. Please take me to see the Great Witch Festival of the Redstone Tribe. As a healer, I am willing to do my part when facing patients. The middle-aged man bowed and hurriedly took him inside. Soon, Greet saw the settlement of this tribe. A small area of houses, each house is round and slightly higher than a person's head. The size is similar to that of a small yurt. 2 tree trunks are supported at the door, supporting a straw mat that may be made of reeds, which serves as the roof of the porch. Gretel followed the middle-aged man and stepped into the house. The edge of the house was surrounded by a platform about a foot above the ground, which was piled with hay and furs. 2 or 3 patients were lying on it, and the rest were busy, wiping their bodies, giving them water, comforting them, and singing. What are they all doing here? Gretel stepped in and immediately exited. Let them all go out. Isolate them separately. How can such a severe infectious disease be crowded together? But, the witch priest of the Redstone tribe said blankly. When someone is in trouble, relatives and friends should accompany him and give him strength. If we all abandon him, how can he escape the claws of the devil? Greet closed her eyes in pain. The quarter-end sprint begins again. The goal of this sprint is to save 1,000 starting monthly tickets from today to the end of the month. As long as you save enough, 2 more chapters will be added. Please subscribe, ask for monthly tickets, ask for recommendation votes, ask for book reviews, ask for all kinds of. It's not that difficult to open a hospital in another world, right? Author, Geolan 2020. Chapter 933. Chapter 930 Gretel, if I am guilty, please let the law judge me. Greet really didn't expect that he would escape the first grade of junior high school, but not the 15th grade. Regarding the need to isolate patients with infectious diseases, when he was in the Kingdom of Kent, he was only responsible for giving orders, leaving all the work to students, subordinates, and parliamentary staff. Whether it was a guard or a magician, they all did a very neat job of dragging the patient away from the hands of the patient's family members. Of course, there was some scolding, threats, and pushing and shoving. Gretel. I can only pretend not to see it. But now, there is no one else and no violent institution strong enough to control it at will. Do you want him to condense a fireball and then shout, all the patients' families get out, or I will blow up this place? Obviously not. Gretel could only suppress his rants and communicate with the Great Witch of the Redstone tribe. Can you let people who are not sick go out first? This disease is contagious. If healthy people stay together with sick people, the disease will be transmitted to healthy people. Infection. The Great Witch priest of the Redstone tribe blinked his eyes and repeated this unfamiliar word with difficulty. Gretel's heart sank. Just when he started thinking about how to explain this concept to him, he heard this dry middle-aged man say. Can diseases be passed on to other people? How is that possible? Have you ever seen someone with a wound on their body pass the wound on to another person? Greet's head buzzed, and he almost lost his breath. If I am guilty, please let the law punish me instead of letting me popularize the concept of infectious disease to the indigenous people. Even when aid was provided to Africa, those African natives at least knew that diseases were contagious. He took a deep breath, turned around and left. The Great Redstone Witch Festival chased after him all the way to the center of the clearing. When Gretel suddenly stopped, he almost bumped into him before he could react. No. Guests who have come from afar, please save us. I have no other way. The young soldiers can still withstand it, but the elderly, children, and pregnant women, they can't hold it anymore. Come on, several people have died. Gretel closed his eyes slightly. At a diplomatic conference a few years ago, when he tried to promote cowpox to barbarians, he was laughed at mercilessly. Barbarians don't need this at all. The barbarian's physique is strong enough. If your physique is too weak, you will be attacked. You will not be able to withstand the cold wind in the wilderness, and you will not be qualified to survive. But the natives of the New World don't seem to be so strict as to die if you can't bear it if you get sick. Correspondingly, their physiques are indeed not as good as those of barbarians, who can ignore most diseases by relying on their strong physiques. Sure enough, the natural environment is too good and life is too comfortable. Many thoughts flashed through Gretel's mind. He nodded calmly. I will help. I came out because it is more convenient for treatment outside. Move all your patients out, serious patients first, pregnant women and children first. Did you hear that? Move all the patients out. The red stone witch ritual straightened up and spoke loudly. Upon hearing his order, the soldiers immediately rolled up their sleeves and started moving people hurriedly. These natives all sleep on leather mattresses. One person carries two corners, and the other person carries the opposite corners. It is very convenient to move them. Soon, the open space in the middle of the shack was filled with patients. As for the furs covering the patients and the hay piled beside the furs, Greet sighed and no longer wanted to say anything. Can mattresses be contaminated with smallpox virus? Can healthy people be infected while sleeping and need to be thoroughly cleaned and, if possible, burned? If necessary, these shacks will also be burned down? This is indeed the case from the perspective of public health and infectious disease prevention and control, but from the perspective of life, great, burn them all, and then all the indigenous people freeze to death in the winter. Without saying a word, he threw out the fortune-telling technique first and scanned it quickly. This tribe is not big, with a total of 200 to 300 people, and about 50 people have been knocked down by the disease. In the field of vision provided by the magic light, there were only a dozen people who were sick and about to die. Fortunately, it can be cured. If you look carefully, everyone's exposed face and hands are covered with layers of blisters, some of which are crystal clear, and some of which have ruptured and suppurated. Switching to dark vision scanning again, most patients have varying degrees of high fever. Very good, it is really smallpox, a serious infectious disease that can wipe out entire populations and wipe out entire populations. Gretel only hopes that this thing will not spread too far, from the southern end of the continent to the northern end, from the east to the west. So how to treat smallpox? Greet recalled it carefully. It seemed that only symptomatic and supportive treatment was available for patients who were already sick. In other words, replenish body fluids, maintain electrolyte balance, replenish nutrients, especially protein, take good care of the skin, and deal with complications such as secondary bacterial infections. Forget it, let's lose the magic. He calmed down, pointed at the nearest babies and children who were unable to cry, and the light on his fingertips lit up. Remove disease. Remove disease. Remove disease. Thanks for the hard work and improvement over the years, and for meditating every day. Now as a 9th level mage, Greet no longer finds it difficult to throw 3-ring healing spells, or 3-ring divine spells. He threw out more than a dozen spells in one breath, bringing all the dying patients back, and then clapped his hands. Others don't need such a powerful spell. Well, let me think about it. Which spell to use? Which spell is more cost-effective to treat mild patients on a large scale? The silver moon deer walked in silently, a hazy white light glowing on its silver-white fur. Cyrilla also stood beside him silently and looked around. Gretel. Do you want to help? No. No need, Red Stone Witch Festival quickly stopped him. While Greet was casting the spell, he had already put on his most solemn set of clothes, with the most animal teeth, gems, shells, and amber, and put on a colorful feather crown. We can treat the remaining patients ourselves. I will hold a ceremony and request the guardian of the tribe. Gretel is very willing to watch the indigenous healing rituals. Then, he saw the whole tribe supporting the old and young, and the healthy warriors supporting and carrying the sick, rushing out and arriving at a big stone outside the settlement. They were both tall, square, with a large red stone with many patterns on it. They set up firewood and burned game, various spices, strange mushrooms and powders. Then, with the great witch festival taking the lead, the warriors brandished javelins and axes and danced energetically around the red stone. What surprised Gretel was that along with the dance and war cry of the indigenous people, an illusory, stone-like light and shadow really rose from the stone. The light and shadow turned in a circle, scattering little bits of light, falling on the great witch festival, falling on the warriors. It falls on every healthy and sick person. So, this big stone, is this what you believe in? Is it the object of worship from your tribe? Do you worship it at ordinary times and ask for it when something happens? What's the difference between you and enshrining a big banyan tree at the entrance of the village, asking the children to worship the big banyan tree as their godfather and godmother, and bringing them to kowtow when something goes wrong? The quarter-end sprint begins again. The goal of this sprint is to save 1,000 starting monthly tickets from today to the end of the month. As long as you save enough, 2 more chapters will be added. There are still 900 votes left, everyone, come on. Please subscribe, ask for monthly tickets, ask for recommendation votes, ask for book reviews, ask for all kinds of. Regarding the indigenous concept of infectious diseases, taken from 1491, Pre-Columbian Apocalypse. To be honest, when I saw this paragraph, my eyes went dark.